All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for coming out tonight. There is a terrific program in front of us. My name is Vikrant Reddy. I'm from the Charles Koch Institute, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here in Nashville, Tennessee. I promise you that is not just a line, because I grew up in Texas, and Texans know that coming to Tennessee is sort of like a pilgrimage, because all the best Texans come from Tennessee, right? Davy Crockett is from Tennessee. Sam Houston is from Tennessee. Jack Hayes, very famous Texas Ranger, he's from Tennessee. You guys, I don't know what it is in the water, but you make great Texans. So I learned this back in the 4th grade. I've never forgotten it. So I love coming out to Tennessee. It's great to be here. I'm at the Charles Koch Institute, where we work on criminal justice, work on lots of different issues. But tonight we're going to talk about criminal justice reform. This is an issue that our board has been interested in really for decades. But it's one thing to be interested. It's another thing to have the right political and policy climate to move forward on an issue. We have that climate right now. Some really amazing things have been happening in criminal justice in a lot of states. In my home state of Texas, some really important legislation was passed in 2007, and things have only gotten better. It served as kind of a national template. In Georgia, not too far from here, some really important legislation was passed in 2011. Then juvenile legislation was passed in 2013. Very important pieces of legislation that will help criminal justice reform along in those states. In Kentucky, we're going to hear from Governor Bevin tonight. Some really wonderful things have happened. And Tennessee, I think, is right there. I've talked to a lot of people in this room, a lot of legislators, a lot of people who are involved in the policy community here. And the will exists in the state. It's really just a matter of turning the will into a reality. And I think that's the big goal of tonight's program. We're going to get started with a prayer. Raul, I think you're going to lead us. Could you come on up?
Actually, our board member, John Oman, will fill in for me as a relief pitcher. Come here, John. John has been on our board and is our secretary for many years, and it's an honor to have John come.
Thank you, Raul. If you'll bow your heads. Heavenly Father, we ask that you be with us tonight, be with this panel and all those in this room, that you open our minds and hearts to your message and your word, that we may take home and glorify you in all that we do. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairie, to the ocean, white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? Thank you. Thank you, Raul. That was a privilege to do that. Privilege to be here to welcome you all. Thank you so much for being here. An important topic tonight, and Raul asked me to share a little bit of my story. And I have a bit of an encouraging but very tragic story that has to do with prison reform. I was born in a household of 7 children. We're half Spanish, so Roman Catholics, and that explains that, right? 7 children. We were all raised the same way in the same household and Christian values, although not without problems, as most families have. So I had a brother. His name was Roman Charles Chacon, my eldest brother, although younger than myself. And he walked a very hard path in life. He was very charismatic. He was the captain of the football team. He was very good-looking. He was very smart. But he struggled with alcohol addiction, as with kind of my family history, and I know that that's not too foreign to most everybody that I know. But my brother, was mostly a menace to himself, but he had been arrested multiple times throughout his young life, mostly for disturbing the peace and, those types of things. Mostly an endangerment to himself. But his path led him down a path of crime, not really, like I said, not really violent crime and not serious crime. But because of the law, my brother, rather than ending up in a treatment center or in a mental health hospital or getting the care that he needed, he ended up in jail. And at one point, in the wrong place at the wrong time, there was a bank robbery, and my brother happened to be kind of sitting on a curb, probably intoxicated. Probably, my brother went through periods of being sober and not sober, but when that robbery happened, it was a bank robbery, and they ran past my brother sitting there, and someone said, "That's him." And they arrested my brother. And all the local jails were full at the time. And because of my brother's track record, even though mostly misdemeanor, a few things that, theft and, shoplifting, things like that you do when you have those issues. Anyway, he ended up in a maximum security prison called Lompoc in California. Maximum security. And there he was sentenced to 18 months. And during his last 6 weeks, he was found dead in his cell, murdered by an inside gang. And I did not know during that time that my mother had been getting threatening phone calls for several months from gangs inside the prison, basically threatening her to continue to send money. So those things are real. When you hear that those things happen, they are real, and they happen to normal families. My brother should have had a life like I did, and he ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time for the wrong reasons. And I think that our laws, should have protected him. He needed to be in a different place. He was a really, really good guy. He really was. He just struggled with a dependency and an addiction. So I am here to tell you that it's so important. It's so important that we reform, that we do this reform, because people need a chance. And since then, I want you to know that prison was shut down. And from the warden and everyone down, there was a lot of really bad things happening. But I think looking at our justice system, looking at our prisons, looking at our jails, and giving these people the opportunity. I heard the sheriff speak one time about, we need, a lot of people there need to be in the mental health hospital, or they need to be in a treatment center. And once they go down that path, and he said, once they go down that path, you can't get out. And my brother was in that system and couldn't get out. So I plead with you to just to look beyond what it looks like, because usually there's some deeper things going on. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Amen. It's funny. We are a small prison ministry, and what effect we do. Can you imagine if nonprofits and the government get together, what we can do to change the state of Tennessee as well as the United States of America? Today, as we're struggling, I mean, if you watch the news today, we're struggling with what happened in Florida, with that issue, and then we're struggling of losing someone like a Billy Graham, who claims our country has lost its way. It just makes you think, why cannot government and nonprofits work together to solve a problem of redemption, to solve a problem of hope? We at Men of Valor do not believe that a person should not do their time when they've committed a crime. But we do believe that a man can change his life after they do their crime if we work together. And that can't happen alone. It's not something one person can do. There's no silver bullet. It's a combination of civil leaders, it's a combination of nonprofits, and it's a combination of all of us working together. And that's what we're about here tonight. We're about discussing ways how we can do it. In Kentucky, thank you, Governor Bevins, for coming today. Kentucky has started something. I think in Tennessee, we're working on it also. But I think in the long run, if we work on this together, we can make changes. Men of Valor was started by a gentleman named Carl Carlson. And Carl Carlson came from a life of crime. He came from a life without a father. He came from a broken family. But he found God. And once he found God, he had other people help him through that process. And that's what we are all about here at Men of Valor. We're here to help men in that process. We have programming, we have mentorship, and we have a way to bring men back to successfully succeed in life. We heard Sandra's story. You'll hear AC's story. You'll hear many stories. My story, I came from prison, I came from gangs, but the only reason I came back to successful living was because people believed in me and encouraged me. But we need to change, but we can only do this together. So hopefully today we can learn something and it'll be something changing. Thank you.
You know, the first time I ever heard about Matt Bevin, at that time, private citizen, I was very, very impressed. And from the intro that they provided me for him, I think when I read you some of these things, you all will understand why I was so excited to hear that he was running for office. Matt Bevin was, this says Matt Bevin, elected governor of the Commonwealth of Kentucky in 2015. He is a husband, father of 9 children, veteran, and successful small business owner. Governor Bevin attended Washington and Lee University in Virginia on an ROTC scholarship. Upon graduation, he served on active duty as a U.S. Army officer and left the service having achieved the rank of captain. Mr. Bevin founded several companies in Kentucky and invested in a number of others in the Commonwealth as well as in other states. He managed and expanded multiple businesses ranging from manufacturing, investment management, and medical devices. His businesses created many well-paying jobs for hardworking Americans. Now, so here's this exciting businessman, entrepreneur, conservative that I hear about who's getting ready to challenge Mitch McConnell for the Senate seat in Kentucky. I'm excited about it. So, you know, unfortunately, he came up a little short in that race, but he was not deterred. I was so excited when he announced he was going to run for governor. He put forth, had a great positive campaign, put forth all the agenda items that he wanted to achieve as governor, laid it out for the people of Kentucky. They really believed in him and his message and his objectives and supported him. He was elected governor. And what is one of the things about the plan that he set forth, it was called the Blueprint for a Better Kentucky. That's really a catchy term there. Blueprint, bluegrass state. I know, that's good. Did your wife come up with that?
I actually did, but you're putting more thought into it, I think, than I can.
Anyway, it was great, and Newt Gingrich would have been proud. And not only that, but he followed through after being elected and worked with the legislature, helped get more Republicans elected to the legislature so that they could then implement all these agenda items. And I've been really, really proud of what he has done. And I'm so excited. And I just want to say, you're so great. If things don't work out well in Kentucky, come on to Tennessee. We'd love to have you, all right? So without further ado, Governor Matt Bevin.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Lee. That's very kind. If I come here, I'm going to end up in Texas, though, from what we heard earlier. So that's the path that people take. Thanks for being here. Truly appreciate it. I'm grateful to you. My understanding is that there's a lot of kindred spirits in this room, that many of us are of like mind as it relates to the desire to provide people with better opportunities and a chance at redemption. And I'll get in a little bit into my thoughts on that. It's interesting. This is the first political job I've ever had. And the reason I even put myself into the political arena ever, I'm guessing, is the reason that some of you that are in the political arena may have done so as well. And that is, things have to change. I was a taxpayer. I employed people, I paid taxes, and I wasn't really pleased with how the monies were being spent by those that were making the decisions, and I thought, well, maybe something could be done about it. And so that applies certainly on the economic front. That blueprint for a better Kentucky that was referred to spoke to 7 tenets that of things that I thought needed to be done, things that I would do if given the opportunity. But they were economic in nature, and they were specific to things like pension reform and school choice and passing right-to-work legislation and repealing prevailing wage and tax reform and things that everybody likes to talk about, but not a lot of people really want to do. And it reminds me of the comments that were made at the outset about being committed to the idea, but there's a difference between being committed to the idea of something and actually doing it. And so when I ran, I actually put it in writing. It's one of the things I appreciate about Men of Valor. This effort is more than just an idea or a good feeling or an emotional knee-jerk response to things. It's actually action-oriented. And so I thought, well, I'm going to put it in writing. I was the only one running that would do so, but that also holds you to a level of account. And thinking back again to the comment that was made about how committed are you, I mean, you're committed enough to be here tonight, and I appreciate that. And for so many of you that are legislators, I appreciate that as well. I appreciate your willingness to serve your constituents and to step up to be here in this room, to be thoughtful about this. But I'm reminded a bit, and you've probably heard this analogy, it's kind of like ham and eggs, you know, it's a common breakfast staple. There's 2 animals involved there. The chicken is involved, but the pig is pretty committed at that point. So the question is, at the risk of being too, trite with this or stretching that analogy and comparing you to the pigs, the question is, how committed are you? I mean, really, how committed are you? Because it's easy to be for it, it's easy to understand emotionally and even theoretically why this matters. But when it comes to those of you that are generous about contributing your time and treasure, for those of you that are legislators, when you think about putting yourselves on the line politically, I would encourage you to be bold. America needs boldness like never before. We really do, and on so many fronts. I'm guessing, too, from what I understand and from those that I've spoken to, you're largely people of faith. But I'll tell you this, I encourage you, this idea, this nonsense that we need to remove any and all common sense, any and all morality, any and all respect for a higher authority than ourselves from the public square and from the public domain and from the political process is crazy. It's crazy. It truly is. And so, and you think about this, I mean, and I say that not to rock the boat in any particular direction or not even assuming that everybody in this room necessarily agrees with that, but look at the foundation of this nation. This came from people recognizing that certain principles, existed. That we were, in fact, endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, not those given to us by those in this room, in this state, or in our state, or any other state. That there's things that transcend what we do in government, and yet, as was said by Raul, among others, a moment ago, I mean, the reality is, if government doesn't get involved in this and doesn't engage those of you in the private sector, shame on us. Shame on us. And so while I came to this position 2 years ago with sort of a perspective that was largely financially driven in some measure, there were many other issues as well, and this particular one was one of them. I believe in redemption. I believe in second chances. This nation is a nation of such. It really is. You think about it. It was founded on it. We have entire states that were formed initially as penal colonies. They were people that were sent here for a second chance. There were people who risked their lives, came over here in rickety boats for a shot at redemption, for some type of religious liberty and freedom, for an opportunity to start their lives over again. That's all we're talking about here. It's not complicated. There is no perfect answer. These statistics here that were shown a moment ago as it related to Tennessee, the numbers of people that are incarcerated, the degree of recidivism, the numbers that are going to be let out, these are not dissimilar than they are in Kentucky. I mean, proportionally, maybe a little differently, but all about the same, and for many number of other states as well. Now, across this country, that 95, 6, 7% of people being in prison, being released, is a common fact. It's a common reality. We're very good. And again, I happen to be a Republican. I'm guessing a number of you are as well, but not necessarily all of you, I would guess. And whether you are or not doesn't matter, other than to say that Republicans, and I'll speak for Republicans, tend to pride themselves sometimes on being law and order people. We're tough on crime. And that's great, and we should As was noted earlier, people should be held to account. There should be consequences, and people should pay fully for the wrongs that they've done to others, and restitution should be a part of that. But so too should be redemption, and so too should the opportunity for a second chance. And so I say this as a person who's a big believer, and again, I'm a former military guy. I'm a guy who's grown up appreciating that there's rules and regulations and that there's a methodology. These things matter, and I understand that. And I'm all for people being held to account. But I also recognize the fact that what we're doing is not serving us well. We're very good at removing people. We're very good at taking those who have done wrong and deserve to be held to account and removing them from society. What we're not good at, what we've never been that great at, frankly, is rehabilitating people, as is evidenced by these numbers. We're not very good at reassimilating people, as is evidenced by these numbers. When you have 50% of people within 3 years in this state and close to 50% in our state, and 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, for all intents and purposes, coming back into the system within 3 years, clearly we are doing something wrong. And at a cost of $28,000 a year here, and it's about $24,000, $25,000 a year for us, again, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. At a cost to you that's now $1 billion a year and rising, for us, $600 million a year and rising. Think about this. It's increasing parts of our respective budgets for those of you that are involved in making decisions on this fact. Even if you want to purely look at this from a monetary standpoint alone, you can't afford to stay on the trajectory you're on here. We can't in Kentucky either. But the cost is so much more than the monetary cost, the societal cost. I was moved by that picture of that father and that little girl. I have 9 children. I have 6 daughters. I have 7 teenagers right now in my home. So I know a little thing or two about people testing the boundaries on things. It's all good. Six of them are girls. 6 of them are girls. I have 6 teenage daughters, so it's all good. Why do you think I'm in Tennessee? Come on now, come on, seriously. I was like, heck yeah, I'll come down there and talk to you. No, I'm just kidding. But I mean, seriously, but I was moved by that picture because you think about this, and some of you may have read this. I'm digressing for a second. It wasn't what I was going to talk about. But there was a book written some years ago by a woman, Dr. Meeker, I believe her name was. It's called Strong Fathers, Strong Daughters. It's a great book. If you're not familiar with it, look it up. I know that's the title. I think her name was Mary Meeker. Strong fathers, strong daughters. I was moved by that picture and touched on the fact that the societal cost, not just the monetary cost, is extraordinary. We can't even begin to measure it. So for you legislators, I would encourage you to be bold. Be bold on so many fronts, but not the least of which is we can't afford not to be. And I'll tell you this too. You can take it for what it's worth. This idea that so many people are afraid to go out there because heaven forbid that we make a mistake, that we get held to account, and that we don't get reelected. Who gives a rip about getting reelected if we're not doing the right thing? Really and truly. I would encourage you, the most powerful way to get reelected is do the right thing. Do it with conviction. And I'll tell you, people who don't even like you will respect the fact that you say you're going to do something and then you go do it. And I'll tell you what, we will speak, and I saw an example of this just happen recently, and some of you made mention of this. I was asked a question by a reporter where it was clear to me he was going to I could tell he'd already written the story, and he wanted just a couple of words to fit into it. I'm sure this doesn't happen in Tennessee at all. But it was interesting, and so I had a fellow with me who filmed his question and my answer. And indeed, he wrote this bogus story that took like 3 words out of a 5-minute answer that I gave him. But I knew that wasn't really touching on the core of what people want to hear. Nobody wants to talk about it, but people wish somebody would. And you all as legislators, and you all as business leaders, and you all as people who have influence in your respective realms, you're the people that people are looking to. We got a lot of sheep, and that's good. But we need shepherds. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of people even among yourselves as legislators who are more, and I'm sure it doesn't apply to those in this room, but perhaps it does. I don't know you well enough to know one way or the other, but there's a lot of people who are purported leaders, find themselves in leadership positions. They're willing to lead as long as there's at least one person in front of them. Those aren't the kind of leaders we need. We need people that are bold. We need people that are willing to step up. 30 years ago, I lived in Japan. I went to university there, and there's a saying in Japanese, derukugi wa utereru, the nail that sticks up will be hammered down. Be willing to be the nail that sticks up. Because I'll tell you what, our society is crying out for it. In that little video, which was loud and staticky and really wasn't that impressive, I didn't say anything that different than any one of you would have said in response to the same question, I'm guessing. But the reality is I put that on my Facebook page just as a counterpoint to the fact that this article really didn't capture either the question or the answer. That thing has been seen by over 13 million people on a Facebook page with less than 100,000 followers. Why is that? It wasn't because it was that clever or brilliant. The reality is it's because it touched a nerve. This issue touches a nerve. Why? Because it's affecting 2 million people in this country. There's 2 million of our fellow citizens, people like your brother, people who started out with every opportunity to go one way, but through any litany of reasons have ended up in a different direction. It could be any number of us. I'm willing to bet in this room we're not more than 1 degree of separation, any of us, from somebody very close to us, maybe a direct family member or someone that close to us, who has ended up on the wrong side of this equation. We have an obligation. We have a moral obligation. We have a political obligation. We have a spiritual obligation. We have a financial obligation. We have a societal obligation to get this right. We just do. This is why I'm doing it. I'm not doing it. I will say this, you'll get no kudos per se, because the irony is this. Many liberals have long espoused the ideas of doing something like this, but have done very little to nothing on this front. And the irony is, even if you were to step up and lead and make the kind of changes that need to be made, and I know that some of you are working to make that happen, and I encourage you to keep on going, you'll get no credit from these groups. None at all. They'll come there and take credit for it themselves, perhaps, but they won't give you any credit. Who cares? Who cares? I just challenge you, I beg of you to rise above the political nature of it. And the fact that you're in this room causes me to believe that you are the types who already are doing that and will do that. And this is what is needed. And so I'll share with you just briefly a couple of the things that we have done, and give them to you as ideas for what it's worth, and you can, again, we can talk about them later if you're so inclined. Incidentally, I don't know, I mean, we are used to, in Kentucky, you all are about a good 8 to 10 years ahead of us on a lot of fronts, especially economically. We're used to taking a back seat to Tennessee on certain things, but this is taking it to a whole nother level. This making me sit back here in the back. I don't know what that was. Just saying. I mean, I'm in the back row there. I'm trying not to roll off the stage. Anyway, I don't know. Sorry, I digress. But in all seriousness, I mean, there's things we can learn from each other and challenge. So I'm going to just give you a few ideas and be happy to be a sounding board for you. My Secretary for Public Safety and Criminal Justice is here, John Tilley over here. And Andrew English is here as well, his deputy over here. These are a couple of guys. Feel free to ask them questions if you haven't as well about some of the things we're doing. But let me just throw out a couple of things. So when I was elected, I was, and forgive me, I'm probably already have used the time I'm supposed to have, but you just, at some point, you just go like this and, give me the sign and I'll shut up. But I will say this. When I was elected, I'm only like the 4th Republican governor in 100 years. We don't do this very often in Kentucky. And I wasn't expected to win neither here nor there, other than the fact that it was a shock to a lot of people, including legislators who then figured, well, they'll just wait me out and we'll be done. The House had been controlled for 95 straight years when I was elected, 95 uninterrupted straight years by the Democrats in our case. And they just assumed that they would wait me out and then they'd be back. It was clear to me that as it related to this topic or any other, there's only so many things that could get done with one arm tied behind your back. And a person who made very clear his job was going to be to make sure that I did not have any success. He'd been elected for 38 or 9 straight years at that point, been the speaker for a decade. And so I knew that. But guess what? So what did I do? I picked something that, frankly, it's hard for people to argue with, especially liberals, especially people on the other side of the aisle, even if they're not liberal. Criminal justice reform moves people. It speaks to people because it's a human condition that we're talking about addressing. And so one of the things we did is in that very first year, even with one arm tied behind my back, I had 44 of the 100 seats when I was elected. So it wasn't even like close, like you could trick a couple into going with you. It wasn't going to happen. It wasn't going to happen. So with 44 out of 100 seats, what do? One of the very first things that I fought for was an expungement bill, the first expungement bill in the history of Kentucky. If you've not ever passed such a thing in Tennessee, I would encourage you to do it. You don't compromise public safety one lick. You can control exactly what it is that you authorize to be expunged. We started, and maybe it'll change over time, but we identified a number of Class D felons that had the ability, having proven their time served and the restitution served, largely victimless crimes for all intents and purposes. We classified which ones were authorized and eligible. We've had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who've taken advantage of this, probably in the thousands at this point. I haven't checked the latest number, but my point is, these are people who now have a chance to get back into the workforce. These are people who have a chance at redemption and a chance at a second chance. Not that complicated. The sky didn't fall. Nothing, our crime rates have gone down, not up. I mean, the irony is we're doing fine on that front. So that's an idea. That's one thing we did. I then worked like crazy, just for what it's worth, to make sure I didn't stay with one arm tied behind my back forever. We went from 44 seats to 64 seats in one election. And that was, but so that then has afforded us the ability to be a party that drives some of these solutions. And again, you have some pretty significant majorities here. It's impressive what you have. And incidentally, and I say this not to be gratuitous, but I had an occasion to visit for a little while with your governor earlier, and he did want me to share his regards with you. He thinks very highly of this organization. He's grateful for what you're doing. He sees the impact of it. And I hope, and again, I don't want to put him on the spot, and I don't know what interaction you've had with him. Hold him to account on this too. I'll say that. Challenge him to be part of the solution. Challenge him not to just be supportive and encouraging to you, but to step up. I'll do that. But I challenge you to challenge him, and to challenge him to challenge you. That was one of the things we did. Another thing we did is, I'll just run through a few of these. Banning the box, you're familiar with it. Fair chance, legislation, giving people just a chance to I did that by executive order. I just simply said, we're going to take it off of every government form. This idea that you got to check a box to say that you're a convicted felon. You're still going to do a background check. You're still going to have that conversation. You lose nothing whatsoever, except you give people a chance to make the case. And trust me, the best among them will always bring it up themselves. And you will, by that time, have come to a realization that these are the kind of people you want as an employee. They may not get the job, they might. But the point is, that's an easy thing to do. I've also encouraged a number of private sector companies to do the same. Some of them have done it. Started something called the CJPAC, this Criminal Justice Policy Advisory Committee. This was something that was put together. It assembled 23 people. They represented victims' rights. They represented prosecutors, judges, law enforcement, the whole gamut. Elected officials, non-elected officials, people from the faith-based community, people just like those in this room, 23 people. And we came together and we broke it into 7 different categories, 7 things that we were going to focus on. We broke people into groups of 2, 3, 4 on a committee, and they worked on bringing ideas forward. And the net result of that is a lot of ideas did come forward, and that is something that we have continued. It wasn't a one-size thing. They've been meeting now for nearly 2 years. I assembled that shortly after being elected, and they have continued to meet now for a year and a half, and they continue to. We've had a couple of people turn over, but in general, this is a group that is committed to seeing powerful change. I'd encourage you to assemble something like that, something similar, to be perhaps the very people that would be part of such a thing. And they've come forward with some amazing ideas. And the net result of that is that we passed a bill, Senate Bill 120, last year that incorporated a number of their ideas, not all of them. It's another thing I'll encourage you. You don't have to do this overnight. You really don't. These are the kind of things that you can do in a piecemeal fashion. So I'll just run through quickly a couple of things. I mean, licensing. It used to be you couldn't even cut hair in our state if you had been a convicted felon. You could become a lawyer, but you couldn't cut hair. I mean, that's crazy. Seriously, I'm really not kidding. So now the restriction on licensing is something that we've taken care of. Breaking down barriers to people being employed inside and outside of the prison walls, starting to do things on that front. Proper incentives for people to actually comply with probation, not penalizing them punitively if they have minor violations because they missed a bus or something. These are the kind of things that, just simple things that don't compromise public safety at all, that we've been able to do. Reentry programs. Just reentry centers, authorizing local jails to have reentry centers, to have programs to work with organizations just like this to come up with ways to make things better in terms of vocational training and job placement, et cetera. Reentry and substance abuse. I won't go into the details on it. Take a look at some of the things we're doing on that front as it relates to medically assisted transition, some of the MAT transition, the things of this sort. I mean, we're starting to do things in Kentucky that are being used as something to be copied by others. There's things that you can do that will empower local communities to help people who are reentering. Take a look at our MAT pilot program. Justice to journeyman, I'll touch on this real quickly. It's easy to do. I mean, you need workforce. We need workforce. You have thousands and thousands of able-bodied, working-age people who could be part of the society if they were able to be. So with this justice to journeyman, to be a journeyman, the certification, you can go anywhere in America with this. It takes 540 hours of classroom time. Where do you have a more captive audience, literally, than in jail? Seriously, you know where they're going to be at 7 in the morning. With some exception, they're generally drug-free. And so to that end, I mean, these are people that can start that process. That's something else that, again, be happy to share more information with you on that. Workforce task, we have people that have drug addiction that have basically been marginalized. They're third-class citizens, hard to get reassimilated. We've started programs to actually give them that possibility. We still have huge issues. I'll stop with that as time doesn't allow too much more detail, but I'll tell you, here in Kentucky, just up the road from you, we still have the 9th highest percentage of our population incarcerated of any state, 2nd highest for women. We're at the front end of some significant change that still needs to happen. We've just put seeds in the ground. But my point is this, it starts with bold leadership. And so I encourage you, please, don't be concerned with the impact. Final thing I'll say is this, on other things as well. I've pardoned a number of people. I've been doing it since I got elected. I'm not going to wait till I'm on my way out the door and then that's craziness. Then I would encourage you to be bold on that front. Encourage your governor, this one, even now as he's winding up, and whoever the next one is, and it may be half of you in this room, I think, are running for governor, from what I understand. I mean, I don't know if that's true. I know there's a lot. I know there's a lot of you, and good luck to you with choosing. But encourage people to be bold. I'm just grateful to you for caring about this. Continue to be not only interested, but be committed. Don't worry about the implications of making a mistake. There is no perfect solution. Even if you do it right, it's not going to be perfect. It won't be. And don't assume because you don't get everything that you want done right away that you've somehow failed. Chip away at it. There's things that we're looking at as it relates to felony threshold for theft and things of this sort that we would have liked to have gotten done that we haven't. Other things like that we'll continue to move on. Just continue to keep your foot on the gas. It's the right thing to do. We're so similar, our two states. We really are. We share a long border, but we share so much else as well. We look up to you in a lot of ways. I'll tell you straight up, but especially economically. You're doing so many things well. Educationally, you're doing a lot of things well. And we're trying to keep up with you on that front, but I tell you, there's things you could learn from us that we're doing on this front. Let's learn from each other. Let's be allies to each other. Let's be friends with each other. And just let me say on my way out, for those of you legislators, those days of eating our lunch without any pushback, those days are over. We're actually going to stick up for ourselves a little bit now. You've been taking full advantage of the fact that we've been asleep at the wheel up there. But the point is this. A strong Kentucky is a strong Tennessee, and vice versa. We need each other. I'm grateful to you. I look forward to working with you. Our team will do the same. If there's anything we can do to be a sounding board for you, please let us know. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All right, well, thanks, Governor Bevin, for coming and doing this. I'll offer yet another personal note for everyone. My wife is from Lexington, Kentucky. When I told her about this event tonight and I told her about the title, she said, well, we're normally taking advice from Tennessee, so it's nice that there's one issue on which Kentucky can offer a little bit of advice the other direction. I want to begin by asking you about something you said that really caught my attention, this strong fathers, strong daughters idea. I'm sure that strong fathers, strong sons also applies. Absolutely. I don't think I'm going out on a limb when I say that I think there's a bit of a crisis of fatherhood in the country. I'm wondering what we can do to improve that situation.
I'll give you my 2 cents worth as a father of 9 children. We need to be responsible for our children in America. We have abdicated our responsibility at many levels. It starts in the home, just straight up does. And I will tell you this, it's not because it's what everybody should do. We don't have a television in our house. We never have. And I say again, nothing wrong with television in and of itself, but I will say this, we've become so removed from taking responsibility for raising our children. We always want to punt that to somebody else. And when we have removed any sense of morality, any sense of God, any sense of religion, any sense of responsibility to our fellow man, any responsibility for us as parents to be responsible for the behavior of our children, and we remove these things from society, and then we end up being shocked and surprised when things happen, that what we've been seeing, then shame on us. And you're absolutely right. It isn't just strong fathers, strong daughters. It is strong sons as well. The responsibility starts with us, but the same goes for, I mean, there's maybe some faith leaders in this room. If there's any pastors in this room, I'd encourage you, step up in your churches too, for crying out loud. I'm telling you what, if you're leaders of a civic organization, step up. If you're the leader of a business in a company, step up. Hold yourself and your employees to a high level of moral authority and integrity. And not only just don't make it a part of a one-page mission statement, embody it, live it, be vocal about it. We want people to keep their mouths shut about things of significance, but to shoot their mouths off or their thumbs off in some anonymous digital way about any kind of idiocy, but we don't talk about the important things. And our children are watching. The last thing I'll say is this. I mean, you look at the history of the world. Nations move and borders move and nations rise and fall due to external conflict, due to actual battle. But what destroys cultures and civilizations? They're not destroyed by outside forces. They crumble from within. And they crumble because of an abdication on the part of the people who have a responsibility for preserving it. And that's us, every single one of us. And I would say to you, if you're not doing as much as you can, then you need to do more.
I want you to fill us in on a very important meeting that you attended. This was just a few weeks ago. It took place in the Roosevelt Room of the White House. It was a meeting on criminal justice reform. I read all about this. I saw the photographs. Mr. Trump is right there at the middle of the table. To his immediate right is Governor Matt Bevin of Kentucky. You were in the room. You know a little bit about the White House's interest in this issue. Can you tell us a bit about that and what happened that day?
The short version is this. To his credit, Jared Kushner, this is something that he's very passionate about. The president's son-in-law, who's very involved in just helping with policy ideas, and he was in the room as well. And his father had been imprisoned, and some of you probably know that story, but it's very personal to him. So this was something he wanted to bring to the table. And I'll tell you, and you could go back and look at all the record of it, I mean, I would dare to say that the president was largely agnostic on this front, didn't really have a thought one way or the other, including, in fairness, perhaps coming into that room. The Attorney General Sessions, who was in the room, there were some cabinet secretaries there as well and some other people. There were probably a dozen, 15, 20 people at the most, maybe probably about 15 people. So people who are thoughtful people, and they had good opinions. But Attorney General Sessions, if anything, has probably been one of these tough on crime, law and order type people, and very unapologetic about it. And I applaud him for his honesty on it. So the president was next to me, and straight across from me was the Attorney General. Interestingly, it was for them as much as anything else that this meeting took place. And afterwards, one of the greatest compliments I got, and I don't think I'm telling tales out of school on this, I was speaking to a couple of the president's advisors, a man by the name of Reed Cordish and a man by the name of Andrew Bremberg. And the two of us were speaking, and then Jared came back into the room after we had dispersed and were sitting around, and came back in, and he was so excited, and he was so fired up, and he literally, and I took it as a compliment that I've been there enough that he just sort of acted like I was one of the staffers, and he said, "That went so well." He said, "I couldn't even hope." He said, "The Attorney General, my father, and the President are in there, talking about this right now." And he was just so excited. So I was encouraged by the encouragement that they had. And the fact that literally just days later, or a couple weeks later, the President in his State of the Union address actually spoke to this. It was apparently not even a given. It wasn't in his speech at that point. It wasn't a given that he was going to touch on it. They didn't believe that he would. If you notice, they spoke less about criminal justice reform and more about prison reform. But I'll tell you what, again, who cares? It's a step in the right direction. Semantics may matter, they may not, but the point is this. The fact that the Attorney General, who I had a very good sidebar conversation with about this issue, was willing and open to look at this, the fact that this was part of the State of the Union, we should be very encouraged by. Because this is a White House that does want to make profound change. And I think if we're patient and if we're thoughtful, we will see things coming down from the federal level on this front as well.
If we push forward aggressively on criminal justice reform, I think we all want to be sure that victims are respected throughout every step of the process. How do we ensure that that's happening?
To make sure they have a voice in any solution you have. And again, with our CJPAC, their voices were very widely heard. There's people in this room tonight who have met, who are representing those very voices. Always have a seat at the table. There should be no policy ever put in place that is not significantly informed by the voice of people who have been on the receiving end of criminal activity. Ever. No matter, even if it seems like it's a given that you're in like mind, they should have a voice. That's all I can say. I mean, make sure that anything that's done is done with them at the table, not just having a voice, but a seat at the table. And that way you know you'll end up with a better informed piece of legislation or whatever the case might be.
When you were putting together the CJ PAC, what were you looking for in the people who staffed that thing, who served on it? What credentials, talents, qualifications?
I will say this, when I put together a cabinet, which is not the question you're asking for, I looked for three things, and it was not dissimilar here. I looked for people who had good character. I looked for people who were credible. They actually had the qualifications that were needed, and I looked for people that were committed to serving. So people that were competent, people that had good character, people that were committed to serving. That's what I was looking for. Same thing for this CJ PAC. But additionally, I wanted them to cover every part of the spectrum. So literally, name any group, the Commonwealth attorneys, the law enforcement community, the jailers, the victims and their families, the faith-based community, from right to left, liberal, elected and non-elected. Without having everything in the kitchen sink, you can do a lot with a couple dozen people. And then it was not to have 23 people debate every issue. It's why we broke it into 6, 7 different categories. So one might be, the drug issue. One might be recidivism, whatever the case might be. And so you have 2, 3, 4 people working on each issue. And we asked people to identify which is your top issue you want to work on, which is your second. We tried to give them their first, and we said, listen, you may have opinions on the others, but your job on this committee is to focus on yours alone, and don't second-guess other people. It'll all be brought forward, and then the group can discuss it. But you want people that truly are committed to serving for all the right reasons.
Governor, we did a poll in, early 2017 at the Charles Koch Institute on the way that conservatives thought about criminal justice issues. And the response was extraordinary. I think, if I remember this correctly, 81% of all the self-identified conservatives said that they found criminal justice either very important or somewhat important in their ranking of policy issues. Obviously, you come right out of the conservative movement. You kind of came up during the Tea Party days. What do you think is drawing conservatives towards this issue?
Here's what I'll say, and again, not to be argumentative. I mean, honestly, I never attended a single Tea Party event in my life. I have nothing against them, but I literally never was involved in it until when I ran for office and was asked to speak to people. But because I was a person who came with this sort of, who's that guy and where did he come from, people just assume you must be part of some kind of a wave. And I don't take it as an insult. I see it as a compliment. I'm all for smaller government and more individual responsibility. I'm all for that. So you can classify me however. But my point being is that I wasn't a part of some movement. I'm an American. I'm a taxpayer. I'm a father. I'm a person who's engaged in the community. And I don't think I'm that normal or abnormal. I think I'm pretty much right up the middle. I'm somewhere right in between. I'm literally just this Joe American. And I think the reason you see 81% is, and it goes back to my encouragement to you to be bold, you will find out that there are so many people that are begging for someone to step up and speak the truth. They just are. They're hungry for it. We have a society that tells us to keep our mouths shut and just to keep it in a box, keep your opinion to yourself. Don't rock the boat. Don't offend anybody. Don't be a this, that, or the other kind of phobe or whatever. Nonsense. The reality is be bold. You can do it. There's variations on how you might speak the truth. We have, at the highest levels of political, power in this country, one approach you could take. There are others. There's different variations of diplomacy you might be able to use, but the bottom line is the truth still needs to be spoken. It just does. And I would encourage you to do it. And I think you will find that at 81% is probably right on target and maybe even low.
I think that's an encouraging note to end on before we move into our panel discussion. So once again, please join me in thanking Governor Matt Bevin. All right, well, we're going to do a panel discussion now with some really, really impressive people. I've got some long biographies here, which I had to pare down because a lot of people on this stage have won a lot of awards. Very, very impressive folks. We've already heard about Governor Matt Bevin and his background. Sitting right next to him is Darren Hall, who's the sheriff of Davidson County. Darren Hall was sworn in as the 61st sheriff of Davidson County in September of 2002, and he was elected to his 4th term in 2014. He's had a 30-year criminal justice career. He's on the National Sheriff's Association's executive board and on their board of directors. He will become the first National Sheriff's Association president from the state of Tennessee very soon. And he served as the 101st president of the American Correctional Association. He recently, and we're going to get into this during the discussion, he recently was awarded the National Alliance on Mental Illnesses Sam Cochran Award because he has a real commitment to mental health reform in this country and here in Tennessee. Over at the far end of the table, we have Verna Wyatt. She's the co-founder of Tennessee Voices for Victims. Motivated by grief over the 1991 abduction, rape, and murder of her sister-in-law, Verna began her personal journey of activism advocating for the rights of crime victims. She's worked in a professional capacity on behalf of victims since that time, and she's gained quite a reputation here in Tennessee. In 2012, along with Valerie Craig and Sarah Kemp, she co-founded Tennessee Voices for Victims. Among the several awards she's won are the 2012 Correction Corporation of America Volunteer of the Year, 2014 Edwina Hefner Community Leadership Award from the Nashville Symphony, 2014 Board of Probation Victim Service Award, and the 2015 Union University's Champion of Victims' Rights Award. Right here we have Anthony Charles. He's the Aftercare and Reentry Manager at Men of Valor. Anthony might have spent his entire life going in and out of prison, but while he was incarcerated after living a life that was driven by addiction to drugs and alcohol, he learned of God's love through this organization, Men of Valor. Once released, he began to work at Men of Valor as an employee, and he's been on staff at Men of Valor for over 6 years, teaching men how to become givers rather than takers in the community. And congratulations to him, because he and his wife Barb were married just this past June. Finally, we have James Amundson, who's the Deputy Director for Americans for Prosperity here in Tennessee. James served in the Air Force. He spent 16 years as an information technology and medical imaging specialist before joining Americans for Prosperity. There are 36 AFP chapters nationwide. The AFP Tennessee branch has over 48,000 Tennessee activists and an ever-expanding base of local donors. They are working hard to preserve the free market economy here in Tennessee and to hold government accountable. Let's get started with our conversation. So, Anthony, I'm going to start with you, and I want to ask you this. Everybody in Tennessee, everybody in this room, I think would agree that people, after they've done something wrong, need to be held accountable. Maybe sometimes that means incarceration. Do the time, but once you come out from behind bars, you should get to put your life back together again, be a normal person, be a tax-paying, productive citizen. It's not always so easy. There are these barriers that prevent you from becoming a normal person again. What are those barriers? What kinds of things do people encounter?
Re-entering into society is a big one. First of all, we're trying to get our identity back. We're being labeled and stereotyped, and that prevents a lot of things from happening. It's a challenge just to get an ID or a Social Security card. And without those two pieces of, two forms of identification, you can't get a job, you can't get housing. There's a lot of things that revolves around just getting an identification and trying to be reestablished into society.
By the way, I want this to be conversational, so if anybody has any thoughts on this question, please chime in. I was thinking, whenever you mentioned the IDs, we talk a lot about things like getting a job and getting the right drug treatment, but something as simple as just getting that license means everything in the world. I've never applied for a job where they didn't ask for that. We have to make sure our folks have those things. Verna, I want to ask you about, just like I asked the governor, the role of victims in this process. we want to provide restitution to victims, and sometimes we have this model that suggests that the only way to provide restitution is with incarceration. What exactly are victims looking for in terms of getting restored? Is it just incarceration? Is it something more?
Well, the incarceration system is not working for the offenders, and it's not working for the victims either. What it's doing for victims, it's making them more frustrated. When you see that maybe you're victimized, your offender is incarcerated, they're not reformed, and then they get out, they do it all over again, and it's just very frustrating for victims. So they don't really receive any justice anyway. And I think it's, you know, when you're looking at, you know, conservatives especially. I'm a conservative voter, and you know, 15 years ago, I wanted to lock them up and throw away the key. That's not reality. And when people understand that's not reality, and I had an assistant commissioner ask me one time, you know, when he said 98% of the people are coming back, Verna, you know, how do you want them coming back? I'd never thought about that before. I don't think people are thinking 98% of the offenders that are locked up are coming back. And what we're doing with them while they're incarcerated is not working. Now, I do know that there are forms of restorative justice where a victim is able to be restored as good as you can be. I mean, you never really I mean, what a victim really wants is their old life back, and they're not going to get that. But in the process of that restoration, the offenders can also be restored and healed. And that's really what we need to be thinking about, and that's just not happening.
Darren, I want to ask you a little bit about your work on mental health and mental illness. An enormous number of people in the criminal justice system suffer from some kind of mental health ailment. What are you guys doing in Tennessee to work on that problem?
Yeah, I think it's really important for everybody to understand that in the 60s in this country, we decided we were going to deinstitutionalize the mental health institutions because it was a bad stigma. We have now criminalized mental illness. We've doubled the stigma. We call it illness and we call it criminal. That's not unique to Nashville. I'm on the board of the National Sheriff's Association. The number one issue facing sheriffs in this country, according to them, and by the way, that's an eclectic group of people, is that we all agree mental health is the number one issue facing us. And the reason it's facing us is today in Nashville, not unlike Louisville or anywhere else, by the way, I went to Western Kentucky, I was telling the governor, so really had some great years there. Not unlike any other city, is that 4 out of 10 people today will be booked in jail who are diagnosed mentally ill. That's not an excuse, that's not a lawyer, that's not a girlfriend, that's not some way to get out of my crime, that's a diagnosis from a mental health professional. I travel around the world. I have been around the world in the world of corrections and law enforcement. And you go any country in this world, we're laughed at about the number of people who are incarcerated in our country. And what we don't tell people is that we incarcerate people for reasons that you forget the crime for just a second. They're mentally ill. They're not on their medication. We had a naked man walk in to get an airline ticket in Nashville a year ago. Middle-aged man with 0 intoxicants in his system walked in to buy an airline ticket. Do you know what we did? Society did. We arrested him, convicted him, processed him, housed him for 20 days, and sent him out on his way. If you don't know that you're supposed to wear clothes to get a ticket in the airport, whatever sanction and punishment you're handing down in a courtroom has no value. So what we have to do is to tell people and talk to people. Here's a question to ask yourself. If you walk out tonight in the parking lot to get in your car, and you see a man or a woman grab their heart and fall over in the parking lot, I assume you'll call 911 and ask for an ambulance, as we should. But I bet you if you see a person who is screaming about elephants that are flying over and singing some song and pointing at things that aren't there, you're probably going to call the police. And society has determined that that is abnormal and strange and weird, so we need it taken off the streets. Well, criminal justice is enabling the reality that that is a mental health problem. 40% of the people are diagnosed with an illness. That's not the excuse, and it's an expensive, unfortunate, inhumane way to deal with what is ill. You would never send someone to jail for cancer or for a heart attack. But for some reason, we decide that man belongs, or woman belongs in jail. And I hope we can find a way. Nashville, we're trying to do some pretty creative things on decriminalizing the mentally ill. I got kind of tired of waiting on other ideas because the jail's the last resort. Why in the world would a person mentally ill end up in jail if the mental health systems were working? But I got tired of waiting on such a thing. And so what we're doing here, we're building a new facility right now. I probably wasn't totally honest with our legislative body here in town. I told them I needed money for a jail, but I told you that 40% don't belong there. Why build a jail? So we're building 3/4 of a jail and 1/4 of what is a mental health behavioral care center. And what I told the police department here in Nashville is I want you to be Uber. You bring me the person and let us decide if they need to be decriminalized by using the mental health assessment. So we're moving in that direction. I hope we'll be able to tell you one day that it's successful. We need to do something better in mental health.
Governor, is this issue on your agenda in Kentucky?
Yeah, I mean, on it's interesting, I'm sitting here taking notes from stuff too, which, again, I encourage everybody here to steal every good idea from everybody, everywhere. That's how good stuff gets done. We have something, this Angel Initiative now, that was pioneered initially years ago in Gloucester, Massachusetts, that we've now are moving statewide in the state of Kentucky. I think we're the only state that's doing it systemically through our Kentucky State Police posts. And then in a number of law enforcement offices, local sheriff's offices and police departments, et cetera, where an addicted person can come in this case. It's not necessarily mental health, but they're often very, very inextricably linked, who could come in and maybe even be high, maybe even be strung out, maybe even have paraphernalia on them. But if they sincerely come in and ask for help, or somebody brings them in that state and asks for them to be given help, that we now direct them not to jail, but to a bed, to a facility, to a program that can help them get help for the actual problem itself. And I think that's the point. I mean, what you said is spot on. I mean, we need to decriminalize. It's often been said, maybe almost to the point of being trite, but we need to make sure we incarcerate and lock up and remove the people that are a danger to us, and not just the ones we're mad at or irritated with. I mean, there's a big difference. We have to be thoughtful about this. And so I applaud what you're doing, and this idea of encouraging people even to have facilities where you could separate them, I think it's great.
You know, on Governor Bevin's note about stealing good ideas from other places, they have this interesting program they're experimenting with in Seattle called LEAD. And the idea behind this program is that the cops themselves have the best information on a day-to-day basis about who's suffering from mental illness, because they see these folks on the street every day. So they let the cops find these guys and take them directly to hospitals rather than have to take them into the jail and book them and go through that whole counterproductive process. It's an interesting idea. I just encourage people to Google it and take a look and, like the governor said, see what you can borrow.
It's interesting you said that, because never heard of that program, was not familiar with it, but I had literally written right above there the need to identify mental illness prior to criminal activity in incarceration. I mean, and I was struck by something you said that made me write that, but that's exactly what this LEAD thing sounds like it's doing. People know who people are that are likely to be falling into this gap. Family members know too. An intercession at the right point in time makes a big difference.
Darren.
I just mentioned one of the things might help you that astonished me after I've been in this a long time, but we started studying 4 years ago the whole issue of mental health. One of the things that you probably should be frustrated about is that the number 1, 2, and 3 reason a person who's mentally ill gets arrested in Nashville, which is not unlike any other city, is that they fail to do something we ask them to do. Well, why would you ask a person who is mentally ill to show up 3 times a week, find some job, pay your fines, be in court? They're not committing new crimes, believe it or not. We create a crime called a violation, which, by the way, then removes the discretion from arresting police officers. They have nowhere else to go. There's a warrant. So we are, in part, the crime ourselves. The system is, in part, failing them. So we have to be real about what the real reason they're coming back is.
Let me say one thing real quick. For those legislators in the room, Google up Kentucky Senate Bill 120 at whatever point you want. And that's this point that was just made by the sheriff is one of the things that is addressed in that. It was one of the things I briefly touched on. But looking at technical violations for things and what really is or is not worthy of being criminalized and causing a person to recidivate right back into jail again. But Senate Bill SB 120 of Kentucky, you'll see there's a whole lot of things we didn't have a chance to go into in detail, but that's one of them, and there's ways you can maybe even do it better and smarter.
James, I want to ask you about something that the governor touched on. I think you'd have some interesting thoughts too, because you work at one of the most really iconic right-of-center conservative organizations in the country. And it's this question of whether or not everything we're talking about today is soft on crime. What is the response to somebody who says this is just a soft on crime dialogue?
Well, I would disagree with them on the idea that a lot of these reforms are actually going to do anything to reduce the impact of crime. This is an issue that transcends, just basic philosophy along the lines of, whether or not we're going to be tough or soft on crime. Conservatives have been historically tough on crime, but to what avail? What exactly has been the effect of being tough on crime? Higher incarceration rates, greater economic impact on state economies and federal economies. If some of these policies are considered soft, well, they're actually being geared more toward having a more positive impact on the local economies, the state economies and such. So I think it would be a mischaracterization that any of these reforms are truly soft.
Oh, sure.
I'd say one thing real quickly too. The term "tough on crime." Think about this. How do we arm folks like the sheriff and his team with the ability to be tough on crime? They got to have the best vehicles to be able to respond in a consistent and timely manner. They have to have the best equipment. They have the best ability to be armed with what they need, literally and figuratively, to do their job well. Guess what makes it impossible to do that? When you're spending $1 billion in Tennessee incarcerating people, or $600+ million in Kentucky doing it. That comes, the money is, there's a finite amount of it. Doesn't mean you don't incarcerate people, doesn't mean you don't have somebody there, but the reality is every dollar you spend keeping a person at $28,000 a person in jail for a technical violation is another vehicle that you could have bought for a law enforcement officer who's driving around in a car with 200,000 miles on it and runs the risk of not even being able to complete the mission that they're on under an emergency situation. So being tough on crime, ironically, is being hampered by our mischaracterization of what that really means.
And to kind of bring that a little bit further is, the fact that we're creating more criminal, regulations, creating tougher sentences for crimes that are nonviolent. Those things, those don't necessarily resolve the issue. This is definitely not an opportunity to criminalize simple mistakes. You mentioned earlier that we were all possibly one step away from somebody that's been involved in the criminal justice system. Similarly, I have a very close family member, made a simple mistake. There was a distinction made between whether or not it was shoplifting or embezzlement. And the fact that he had stolen from a place where he was employed, it was considered embezzlement. He was still shoplifting, but certainly there was tougher penalties for embezzlement than shoplifting. So you can say it was being tough on crime, but it was still the same crime.
Yeah, Darren.
I hope all the legislators have left. We have any legislators? Okay, she's a long way. Y'all catch whatever she throws at me. We have to be careful when the politics of crime get in the way of making good decisions. Tennessee's not unique, but I'll just give you one example, and this is not unusual, but it is what happened here 10 or 15 years ago. People wanted to get tough or different on the crime called prostitution in Nashville, or at the time we were at the state level. So the issue of prostitution was thought to, well, y'all have heard the story, right? So the prostitute would get in and get out before the police officer gets back to the zone in which he or she picked them up. That's an old story. It's probably true in some cases. But so what did the legislature do? What did we do? We passed a law that says that if you catch a person in the act of prostitution on either side, that within a mile of a church or a school, then you'll be subject to a 7-day sentence. Well, just so you know, in Nashville, there's no land located further than a mile from a church or a school. But if that's what you want, that's okay. My problem is, in 7 days, we don't get the needle out of her arm. I want you to understand that if you want to do something about prostitution, I'm just using that one. 7 days isn't enough time for her. Typically, don't throw anything. It's not always women, but the reality is, let's do something about why. Who's doing it is what's wrong with this whole conversation. You know, my wife watches whodunit movies and reads books about whodunit. And that's what's wrong with the criminal justice system. People are satisfied with who did it. I want to know why. If we want to know why she's on the streets of prostitution, we will fix the reality. If you want to know who she is, then you're not where I am. And so we've got to get the conversation to talking about why are people going to jail versus who, and quit counting it as a solution when you pass a law that really just said put them in jail for 7 days. Why don't we say let's deal with the issue of multiple disorders and addictions and mental health to help her, and you may do something about the problem.
Anthony, I want to ask you, I do a lot of research and writing in this area, and one thing that all the experts seem to agree on is that when a person's behind bars, it's incredibly important for them to maintain contact and ties with family members. And I'm not sure how easy that is. Can you give us some insight into phone access and email access, just how easy it is to stay in touch?
For most facilities, it's letter writing. Phones is two things happens with the phones. If you have financial support from the outside, or it's survival of the fittest for the phones. And then email, I don't know of too many facilities that allow you email access.
It's hard. Vern, I want to ask you a bit, since you identified yourself as a conservative voter, I'm a conservative voter. I think we can fairly guess that Governor Bevin is a conservative voter. Two pretty important components of the conservative coalition in the country, the business community and the faith community. In what ways can people in the business and faith community be directly involved on a day-to-day basis in these issues?
Well, I would say, just from looking at the organizations, the faith organizations that are working with incarcerated men and women in Nashville that are successful, that are having great successes, Men of Valor, Magdalene House, and The Next Door. They are making a difference. And it's a significant difference, but we're not looking to them to say, okay, what are the things that they're doing alike? Because that's where the answer is. And I can, just from working with Men of Valor, I can tell you that, first of all, it's healing the person, giving them hope, and then when they get out, they're surrounding them with support. That's what all three of those agencies do. And prison doesn't do that. They're not getting any healing, or hardly any healing in the prisons. And then when they're flat in their sentence or they're on parole, they're basically out on the streets looking for their own job, trying to find a place to live, trying to regain their license, trying to regain their life all on their own, and it's overwhelming. And with help from organizations that have a plan that has actually been put into action and is working, it can be just a great benefit to the state. But I don't think we're utilizing it enough. Why in the world are we not looking at these agencies that are working and saying, hey, you know what, let's make a template for the entire state?
I can make one suggestion on that front, too, is encourage, and I think this is exactly what's happening here tonight, and I applaud you for this. Encourage these organizations to start to talk to each other, too, and create environments where maybe as legislators, and I do this as governor, I literally will invite some of the heads of these respective organizations, the likes of which you've just said, our equivalents of them, the names don't matter, but the point is there's similar organizations where, they're focused on the same issues, but they're operating in silos, inviting them to the governor's mansion to have a lunch and sit around and talk about sharing best practices and ideas and finding ways to pool resources in commonality. I will mention the name. Like the Healing Place is a very well-regarded such institution. It's been around forever in Louisville. But there's smaller communities trying to do variations of the same things that could just so immediately learn from them and replicate from them. And so I think in some measure we have an obligation to make sure that we use the influence we have to get people on the same sheet of paper. It's something else that we're really focusing on in Kentucky as well.
Could I say one more thing?
Sure.
also there's barriers. There's barriers for faith-based nonprofits going into the, into the institutions. And so I think that you have to have some kind of dialogue between the Department of Correction, the state, and these nonprofit organizations to see how they can partner better and to remove some of those barriers so that they can go in and be more effective.
Michelle, have I got time for one more question, or do we have to move on? One more, okay. I can't escape without asking about the opioid epidemic. You can't open a newspaper these days without reading about it. Darren, I want to turn to you and ask you, is it a problem here in Nashville or in Tennessee more broadly? And if so, what are you guys doing about it?
Yes, anyone who says it's not a problem, especially, I mean, Kentucky, but Ohio, you guys, it's, and it's bad everywhere. The reality of it is the potential for what it's doing to our country. I mean, it really is. And I think it's very good news. I don't care about parties. I don't care about states. It is a universal conversation right now. It really is. And maybe for the first time in my lifetime, I think everybody understands the significance of it. This is, there are more people dying of this than guns and cars. You will see tonight in Nashville, unfortunately, someone was probably shot and someone died in a car wreck. You will not see the 3 people who died of an overdose. And what you don't think about is that 75% of the people who are dying of basically heroin overdose today were originally prescribed after a legitimate surgery. And so I'm not going to point him out, but my son is in this room. My son had a surgery in Nashville 2 months ago? A pretty significant surgery. We walked out of the surgery and the prescription that was prescribed for him was 80 Percocet. 80. Now, I'm not an expert in pharmaceutical, but there aren't very many drug dealers in Nashville who have that much power in their pocket right now. And we have to, I'm not blaming the doctors, but people, that is heroin in a bag. And it is incredibly addictive and dangerous, and it is on every street in this country. And for the first time, I think society gets it that it's not over there on some bad streets behind a dumpster. This is in your cabinet right now. And I just hope we all realize, and by the way, that's the big picture. The ugly side is, in a booking room in every jail in America right now, there are people that are overdosing while being arrested. And you've got police using Narcan. We're using Narcan. You got now, it is the most significant epidemic I've seen as it relates to criminal justice in my 30 years.
Let me say something about that real quick. And again, for the legislators that are here, I was speaking to your governor, as I said earlier today. We talked about this issue among others. My understanding is there's a piece of legislation, I don't know where it stands, I don't know which body it's in, that would look to limit the prescriptions. Get behind that and tighten it up even. Kentucky, last year I fought for a limit of 3 days. A 3-day supply is all you get when you leave a hospital now in Kentucky. It's the lowest by far. You all are looking at a 5-day limitation. Here's a couple of quick facts, you probably know this. To the point that the sheriff just made, 86% of the people that are addicted to heroin or fentanyl or carfentanil or the next iterations of an opioid started their addiction with a prescription drug. The vast majority of them non-intentionally. This is the pharmacodynamic effect of an opioid is so different than anything else. It's why it's not like anything else. It is so highly addictive. The fact that in Kentucky last year for 4.4 million people, we prescribed 359 million pills, 79 pills for every single man, woman, and child. Last year in Kentucky, or in Tennessee, you have 6.6 million people or so, and you had 7.6 million prescriptions, full doses, the kind of which was just referred to. We've got an overprescribing problem, and again, not to blame it on anybody. I dislocated a shoulder a couple years ago. I was in the hospital. Obviously, I was in pain when it got back in the socket after 3 hours. And the third emergency room doctor to try. I was in less pain and very grateful. They prescribed me a big old honkin' vial full of stuff, and I said, I don't need it, it's okay. And the doctor said, again, with good intention, not a bad person, no, you're gonna be in pain, you might tonight roll over and be, wish you had something. I said, listen, I'm in less pain now, I'll be okay. After I turned him down 3 times, he literally said to me, he said, "Trust me, you want this. This is the good stuff." And I'm not kidding. And again, he's a pusher. And again, not a bad person. He really genuinely was trying to look out for my best interest. From the level, I mean, I would encourage you as legislators, what are you demanding of your public universities in the qualifications to become a doctor? Why in your public universities in Tennessee, and these are things I'm pushing in Kentucky, not only, I mean, doctors have not been trained in the pharmacodynamic effect of an opioid. They just haven't. They're not being retrained in it either. They don't even understand the impact of these. The CDC has made clear that within 5, people who become addicted to opioids become addicted after 5 days of use, 5 days. And yet we're sending 10 and 20-day supplies home. The average in America last year, a 17.7-day supply was the average of what was sent home. And yet the average person who becomes addicted in 5 days. Why are we doing this? Why are these even being sent home, period, outside of a hospital or pain clinic is one question I'd ask. I like the idea of 0. I settled on 3. But the point is this. It should be a whole lot less. If 5 is the threshold at which some people are going to fall off the cliff, don't allow people to get to that. Your 5-day bill, I would encourage you to be all for it, and if you can tighten it down to something less than that, I would encourage you to do it. This is a huge, huge, huge epidemic, and the point is well taken. More people die every year in this country from overdoses than died during the entire Vietnam War. And that has scarred a generation in a nation for generations. This is a huge problem. And fentanyl and carfentanil, which are now these synthetic, derivatives that are synthesized, largely in China, that are making their way, and these are so much more potent. And they are destroying people. This is something that we've got to be serious about. So I would encourage you as legislators, be proactive. And just take a look at, take our bill, House Bill 333, take a look at it, steal it, take it in its entirety, change the name from Kentucky to Tennessee, and just one of you file it if you can still. And we also put in there penalties for the people who want tough on crime. We took another thing too, I would encourage you, what are you doing as it relates to addressing things like fentanyl and carfentanil? I'll bet your criminal code doesn't even address these things. They didn't exist. These things, nobody, I'll tell you this, dealers that are pushing fentanyl and carfentanil are not using it, because if you use it, you run the risk of dying. Anybody who is pushing this, that's not a Class D or even Class C. These should be Class B level. This is like pushing death, and you know it. If you're pushing death for $1, you should be held to a high level of account within our criminal justice system. So take a look at House Bill 333. It was specifically addressing 2 sides of an equation, being tougher on those for whom it should be tough and less so on the others. Again, this is a big, big problem, and I can't reiterate enough how important it is to not allow so many people to become addicted. We're doing this to ourselves on purpose. Last thing I'll say is this, again, in your public universities, not just the training, that your doctors are getting, but everything else that you have the ability to control. You have the ability to control a lot of things that are done at the medical level in your states through your universities. Be mindful of the power you have, the power of the purse in the House in particular, and incentivize the kind of things that you want. Encourage your doctors to be trained for the ability to deal with this situation, and to be penalized if they aren't good players on this front.
Those are some sobering notes, but in a sense, I'm actually left optimistic, and I'll tell you why, because the governor is not reading from prepared notes up here. This is genuine passion. I mean, he knows these figures. He's obviously studied it. He cares a lot about it. I can sense it sitting right here. Nobody here is reading from prepared notes, actually. Everybody up here who's interested in criminal justice reform is really passionate and really genuine about the issue. I think there's a lot of people like that out in the country, and so I'm an optimist, ultimately. Thank you all for coming out today, and please join me in thanking our panel.
I found myself facing, 15 to 25 years in prison. 18 years old, charged with attempted criminal homicide. My parents did everything they could to bring me up the right way, so I can only imagine how they felt.
It's really hard to know where to begin because we've traveled a road of addiction. I'm watching my son go to the bottom. It really looked impossible, truly impossible. It was like a mountain that could not be moved.
My father relationship with James was practically non-existent, where I felt more like a warden in my own home.
I prayed, Lord, please help me. I got involved with the MOV program within CCA.
Fast forward a few years. Here he is, out of jail, in the Men of Valor program, being prayed for by people like you. Prayer is absolutely amazing.
One of the relationships that has been a major part and has major impact in the transformation process of my life has been my relationship with my good old dad. God has taken all that negativity and distrust and completely flipped the script. I just want to tell my parents, thank you. And I know that thank you's not enough. And I just want to tell them that I'm happy to be there for them for the rest of my life and for the rest of their lives.
He's gone from somebody who was pretty scary to a person who's riding the bus to come see us, to taking 2 hours to ride a bus. So I want to thank all these people, every one of them, for every piece of effort, prayer, money, time, love, heart, and hope that they bring to this ministry, because they've brought hope to us. And I know what's happening in my son's life is going to bring hope to a lot of other people. This program is an answer to prayer.
On behalf of the Men of Valor organization, I just want to thank all of you for being here tonight. I'm on the board, many of us are on the board, and have had the pleasure of seeing change lives. And I only wish that everybody in the entire state of Tennessee could have been here tonight. And this is the first of many opportunities that we'll have. I want to thank Waller for sponsoring us tonight. And especially I want to thank Governor Bevin for your commitment and your time being here tonight. You didn't have to be here, you wanted to be here, and we appreciate that very much, and the entire panel. And the governor said many times, get involved, get involved. Well, an opportunity to get involved, little sales pitch, Men of Valor, breakfast activity, fundraiser for the Men of Valor, April 10th at the Music City Center. And you can learn more about the ministry and your choice whether or not you choose to be a part of it and contribute. But it is our major fundraiser to be a part of changing lives. And again, the information is right here. We would only request that you tell us you're going to be there, because we're anticipating 1,000 people this year. Okay? Thanks again for being here tonight, and special thanks to Governor Bevin. Thank you very much.